everyone. My name is Steve Scheier, and welcome to the Firestarters video series. My pleasure today is to introduce you to Marc Hauser. Marc is the author of numerous newsletters, and he is a legal expert in the field of cannabis. My name is Steve Scheier. I write and I talk about power, and I work with leaders in cannabis to help them get into their power, empower others, and achieve their business goals. I'm also the author with Michael Ashley of this new book, Power Up, Essential Tools for Cannabis Business Leaders. And it's my pleasure to welcome Marc to the show. I'm really thrilled to welcome Marc today. He is the author, as we'll get into, of a marvelously funny and informative newsletter called Cannabis Musings that he writes on his legal work. And Marc, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about the industry.
That's fantastic. So, Marc, tell us about how you became involved in cannabis. How does your cannabis story and journey begin? There's always an interesting story, and I'm quite sure that you have one.
Well, I'm a lawyer, so I'm not that interesting. But
come on, you are too.
I've been a lawyer for over 20 years with my focus on capital markets, so debt and equity, as well as transactions, so mergers and acquisitions and the like. I started out in various law firms, spent 15 years in-house working for as the personal counsel to a Chicago-based investor doing his deals. Moved out to wine country about 4 years ago and started learning about the cannabis space. And at the time, there were very few seasoned deal lawyers practicing in cannabis nationally. So I started to make a network and saw an opportunity. This was, still early on in after California had passed its updated adult use regulations, and which really sort of turned the tide in terms of statewide legalization in the country. It wasn't the first, but it was certainly the biggest. And then about 3 years ago, I joined Reed Smith, which is a global 1,600 lawyer firm, to pursue the industry. I'm a partner there out of our San Francisco office. I head up our cannabis practice team. I'm involved. I and my colleagues are involved in every aspect of this industry, whether it's representing MSOs and large companies to startups to investors, companies doing business with cannabis, everything, every sort of aspect of understanding what I refer to as the quantum physics problem of cannabis, and that it's both illegal and highly regulated at the same time. And everything has to be dealt with that problem. That's my cannabis journey. I sort of came across it, and I saw an opportunity here for something that's really interesting. I mean, it's rare as a service provider, professional, or whatever, to be involved in building a brand new industry. It's an old industry, but a brand new state legal industry, and especially as a lawyer working on something that, like I said, is illegal. It's very strange to be working on something that is state legal but completely illegal at the federal level.
It's really interesting and fascinating. And is there two things you can point to that have really changed in the 4 years that you've been involved in the industry? Are there two things that has surprised you about how the industry has changed over that period of time? This is not a pre-approved question. We didn't talk about this before, but I really think it's one of the fascinating things about this entire process is that the industry is moving so quickly.
Yeah. 4 years in this industry is almost a lifetime, even though it's not that long, which is very strange. I'm definitely not an old timer in this space, but it's still a very long time, and the industry has been through an incredible amounts of growth since its beginning. I would say the biggest things are is that the industry really has matured in many ways. When I first started, the biggest companies weren't that big. And there wasn't much consolidation, and things were moving. Laws were changing very rapidly. Problems were arising very quickly. It was a case of whiplash every day for operators.
Whiplash every day, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. And at the same time, you had people throwing money, investors throwing money left and right at these companies to grow quickly and go after that very early stage opportunity all over the place.
Right.
I think that all of that has sort of matured out of those sort of very early stage growing pains. You have a lot more consistency in terms of management, in terms of processes, in terms of the basic ways that the laws work. Things are still developing, but there's much more sort of regularity to things now. And similarly, the investment public has sort of taken the same approach. It is, it's now much more mature capital coming in. People are approaching this not as, it's still early stage, but not quite as early stage as it had been. Right. To me, these are all good things. The second is, I think that and this goes along with the maturity of it, is that now on a national level, from a policy perspective, cannabis is becoming much more normal. It's not just the polls, which generally have, the polling is generally around 2/3 or a little higher, of the American public wants cannabis to be legalized in some form. Generally that's medicinal, with a smaller number, but still I think a majority, if I remember correctly, wanting or approving of adult use. But again, I don't remember that number exactly. Right. But also, at a state level, where you have 36 or 37 states now have cannabis legalized in some form, have medicinal, and then I think it's 15 or 16 of adult use. Those numbers are not totally correct, but right, those are in the range. You have a big shift at the federal level, where legalization is sort of petered out. It's still out there, but it's unlikely to happen this year.
You mean federal legalization?
But you've got but nothing has changed, and the federal government is allowing this industry to continue by a matter of grace. And whereas 3 years ago that was a lot less reliable in that of that future. I should note one thing. I apologize. I should have said at the beginning, none of this is legal advice. I have to say that for purposes of ethics rules. I have to remind the listeners, none of this is legal advice. It can't be relied on.
The listeners are so no.
My own thoughts on the industry. But anyway, so going back, things are, the policy perspective on this industry, and the fact that Congress is debating legalization is a big deal. Even if it doesn't get there, it is, it's become much more normalized. And to me, that is a very big change, from where the industry was 3 years ago. Sorry for the background.
Oh, no, absolutely no problem. I think it's really an interesting and fascinating situation. I don't know in my lifetime that I can remember a substance which is so highly regulated, but so diffusely regulated also. Every state has different rules. There's no underlying, perspective about it. I can't think of a single product that has had to endure similar constraints. Can you?
No.
It's kind of crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You see, if you'll tolerate one more off-schedule question, because it just sort of came to me, is, so many different states are doing so many different things.
Mhm.
And you have to. I used to work in the state legislature in California. I've always been a public policy geek. I think it's important to find a balance between what's good for the industry and good for government. If
Yeah.
you overly regulate an industry, if you overly tax an industry, you're going to kill it. If you are, but the contrast at the other end, you're not going to do well either. So, looking over the states, is there a state that, in your mind, is doing a pretty good job of balancing those two constituencies, or not constituency, but balancing those
Yeah.
two poles? Is there a gold standard emerging in the states that you can think
Ooh.
of?
Nobody's really coming off the top of my head. I mean, the problem is that everybody complains about their own situation.
Right.
And I mean, taxes are very high everywhere, but there's reasons for that. Regulations are burdensome everywhere, but there are also reasons for that.
Right.
But I think rather than picking on any particular state, I would say that the regulatory regimes are tough everywhere, because but I get the sense, and I get the sense also talking from folks in other states who are dealing directly with state governments in particular areas where I'm not sort of as involved, is that most of these state agencies want to make it work. They're generally business friendly. They're understaffed is the problem, is
Yeah.
in a lot of places, and they're just overwhelmed because they're dealing with regulations that are new and in a lot of ways underdrafted, and don't really sort of anticipate a lot of ways that industries develop. And as lawyers, we like to come up with challenging questions for weird situations, and
Yeah.
you can't draft statutes for all of that. There's no case law,
Right.
so it is a so I think everywhere, there's always going to be room for improvement in
Right.
every
And what I was
situation.
asking,
Yeah,
rather than
but
criticize anybody, it was more, is there anybody who's thinking
yeah,
better and more strategically about it? Are some of the newer states like New
yeah,
York and New Jersey? So I wasn't
yeah. I
asking
think
you
I
to
get that.
criticize anyone.
I think that certainly with New York and New Jersey, I think everybody's hoping that they'll learn from some of the problems of past, of other states that
Right.
haven't done it right. I think Nevada, from what I understand, does a nice job. Their laws are relatively friendly, and are fairly straightforward and easy to understand. Things take a lot of time in that state because the government agency is so overwhelmed.
Right.
But you look at the success of in Las Vegas,
Mhm.
which cannabis is very much a part now of the tourist culture
Mhm.
in a way that that isn't like nowhere else.
Right.
And so I think that it's in places like that where there's a lot of success there.
Wonderful. So, Mark, one of the ways I became most familiar with you is through your incredibly funny newsletter. Funny, but also fun-filled and fact-filled and strategically important newsletter, Cannabis Musings. So, can you tell us a little bit about what was the inspiration to start the newsletter? What do you seek to focus on? And also, please tell the listeners how they can subscribe to it, because it really is something I look forward to seeing every week. And I think it's must reading in the space. So,
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And so I've been writing it for I don't know exactly when I started, but it's been over 3 years now. And I was trying to think about a way to start blogging about the space, but from the premise of nobody wants to read what a lawyer has to write, which is generally true. Lawyers are boring, and lawyers have a very specific style. because we have to. It's part of the job.
Right.
But a lot of lawyers, I think most lawyers tend to write their own marketing and content in the same style that they do a contract, and that's
Right.
awful. And awful is the wrong word, but it's not necessarily something that's compelling and easy to read. And so I try to start from the premise of how could I take a style that is easy to understand, is breezy, but is communicating substantive information about something that's going on in the cannabis space, and trying to teach people about taking a specific thing that happened in the news or a specific concept or problem, and
Right.
just, and give a perspective on it that is, sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's something going on in the business of cannabis, and just thinking about it, and, putting a perspective on it, or regulation or policy. And so and I've been doing it nearly weekly for about 3 years now. And I put out about, I don't know, like 500 words or so every week. I do try to keep it as funny as I can get away with. And again, there's only so many jokes you can make in a cannabis newsletter. And I really try very hard to not make cannabis related puns, because those are very tired. But
Yeah, exactly.
as Steve, you've seen, a lot of my jokes tend to be Yiddish and related, or things about like quantum physics and just really arcane stuff. So it's just, try to keep it light. But again, it is, so most recently, my last 2 emails have been about my predictions, how my predictions for last year panned out, and then my predictions for this coming year.
I saw
Yeah.
that, and yeah, please.
Yeah. And I'll break down, if a big transaction occurs in the industry and there's something interesting about it, I'll break down a specific topic, try to explain what's going on, so people have understanding of the context of why certain business or finance decisions are made. And it's all for marketing purposes. But it's been very successful. My mailing list is over 500 people now, on top of what gets posted to the firm's blog site, to LinkedIn, to Twitter, all of that, to try to just continue to gain exposure. And it's been successful. I continue to gain business solely from my musings. So, it's hard to market as a lawyer. It's
So how
extremely
do
hard.
people sign up for the newsletter?
Oh, so you can, if you can go to my website, or the Reed Smith website, or my webpage, my bio, and down there below, there are links to the blog posts, which are my musings. And then in those, there's a subscription.
Okay.
So, and I don't know if we can embed a link after this.
I'm sure we can. We'll embed a link, and it'll be fine. It'll be great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, because I read of course, you read your newsletter where you talked about things that didn't happen and things that did happen. So talk about the 2 of the things maybe that you think are going to happen this year that you would want people to know about.
I think that legalization will fail in the federal government. I don't, you asked me something that I think will happen. I think that what will happen is legalization will fail, which I think is worth. So I realize I'm turning that around, but I think it's worth discussing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's such a big topic, and it's hard to always guess what's going to happen in Congress. But I just don't think that the political will is there in the Senate, and I think a lot of other people don't think that either. There's talk about banking opening up, but even then, I still don't think that happens. I'm just cynical. But unfortunately, I've been right about the Safe Banking Act not passing for 3 years now. So I just don't think the political will is there. I think that whereas things aren't going to happen at the federal level, I think things continue to just move along at the state level. It's hard to really sort of guess when New York and New Jersey will finally have their adult use laws in place. I think they said New York would be sometime within the next year or so. I don't remember exactly when, but I think states are only going to continue to expand greatly. Another outside of the policy realm, I think that M&A activity slows down. I think that there was a lot of M&A activity in 2021 that was driven by, the consideration that legalization might actually occur.
Mhm.
Plus with very strong stock prices in the first half of the year for the industry, which have come back down. So I think that M&A activity slows down.
Got it. Okay. And what have you know about? I mean, I've heard and read stuff about a compact of states. So, in order to facilitate interstate commerce, that a group of states that are contiguously aligned, like Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, probably not Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, might try to create a compact so that they can ship product within those states. Have you heard about that before? And do you think it's going to hold up in court?
So yeah, no, and there's a couple of folks who are championing that cause to try to make that happen. That we haven't really seen anything formal yet. The issue that's being discussed is indeed an interstate commerce issue. That right now, every state that has legalized cannabis has a law that says that you can't cross state lines with product. You can't import or export.
Right.
It's so even though it's all federally illegal, these limitations are actually driven by state law. There's fair arguments to be made that all those types of state laws may be unconstitutional under Supreme Court case law relating to the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Without getting into too much detail and boring people with it, but it's the same reason why, for example, the state of Washington can't say, our apples in this state are untaxed, but apples that are come from out of state are taxed $1 per apple.
Right.
They can't do that.
Right.
That is a burden on interstate commerce. So similarly, the argument is that saying that you can't import California cannabis into Oregon is arguably a burden on interstate commerce. The idea has been that's a couple of sort of contiguous states get together and say, all right, we're going to open up the state lines to each other. Right. And we're going to agree on what the tax regulations are going to be, so they're all equalized, so nobody's competing with each other, and it isn't a race to the bottom. Yeah. And so, I think they hold up in court because there's nothing preventing that right now. And the argument is that the current laws are unconstitutional, opening up those barriers. I would think, again, not legal advice, but I would think
not legal advice
would be constitutional. So I don't see an issue with it. Okay. But I think it's going to take a lot of coordination. And, I think the thing that may keep people from doing that are constituencies who are concerned about competition coming in.
Oh, for sure. For sure. There's everybody who thinks it's a good idea.
But I think it's a preview of where things eventually will end up. Yeah. Over time, after legalization occurs, these borders are going to come down, and there's going to be, it'll be like any other product where you can buy and sell anywhere. And so the industry and states will need to deal with that problem. Even though it's for some, it's going to be a problem. For some, it's going to be a solution.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Marc, as we wrap up our session today, and thank you again for being on, what are your big goals for 2022, and how can people reach you?
My biggest goal for 2022 is to double my subscription base.
Okay. All right, well, hopefully we'll play a role in doing that.
Yeah, but more people, the better. It is one of the things I enjoy, talking with you and others about. It engages in these topics and thinking about, how to solve some of these problems. And again, You can go to reedsmith.com and look me up there, under the professionals link.
Right.
And then follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, because I cross post the new musings to those as well. I'm always available to talk about the space.
All right. Well, you have been a delight to talk to today. We really, really appreciate having you on, and I'm hoping that your subscriber base will in fact double this year. And I will look forward, as always, to getting your weekly musings, which I find so informative and amusing. So thank you very much for coming on, and you have yourself a wonderful day.
You too.
Okay?
Take care.